I've caught myself multiple times. This is a freaking real job, what I'm doing now. But I left the 8 to 5 office job where people say, oh, do you want to come, run our race and speak at the pre-race event and do this kind of stuff? And maybe they would comp my entry fee or something. And I got to this point of like, I'm paying to do other people's marketing.
Yeah.
Like I loved the experiences. Like I loved getting to go and be in the community and run. And so I easily wrote it off as like, yeah, like I get to go and do like these experiences. But I don't know, however many of those, it started to be like, wait a second, this is what I've got. This is my accounting degree. This is my, I'm not making money on the side, like, or in a office job. Like this is my craft. This is what I've mastered, if you will, for 20 years. And I had to put a value to it because if I don't, nobody else is going to.
Season 4, episode 7. We are here in the studio. Krissy Moehl, thank you for taking some time out of this is your busy season coming up on the Chuckanut 50K, and you made some time, and really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate the advanced planning. Otherwise, this time is kind of consumed.
We appreciate it, and you are normally spinning a bunch of plates. I'm using your words. Yeah. You're spinning plates. You're an entrepreneur. You have multiple facets to your business, but at the core of it, you're a runner. And we set aside that you do not run from predator animals. You run because it sounds like it's partially therapeutic for you. You work out a lot of things with running, and it helps you set goals and all of these things. How did you get started running? And we'll get into the different businesses, but at the core of it, how did you start running?
My mom was somebody that had both my sister and I very involved in lots of different activities throughout childhood. She single parent. My dad was away at sea a lot, so she had us kind of bouncing from thing to thing with the belief that if a busy kid would be a kid that was out of trouble. So I think that's where the spinning plate mentality comes from, is like I just love dabbling in all things. Where running became so specific, probably 7th, 8th grade, I started identifying with it as a track runner, and then high school, college, and then my junior year of college, I worked at a running store all through college, and I'd gone away overseas to Ecuador for 6 months. And while I was away, running coaches had always kept us like an hour or less. I was an 800-meter runner. You don't run longer than an hour. But living overseas, nobody's telling me what to do. And I just found myself out for hours and hours, no water, no food, not knowing what I was doing.
Trail running.
Yeah. Well, mostly roads. I didn't really know how that all worked. I didn't grow up hiking or backcountry anything really. And so when I came home, when I went back to the running store that I had worked at, that had been sold and bought by somebody else, and thankfully I came recommended and they hired me back. And Scott McCoubrey had hired Scott Jurek, who had just won his first Western States. And the name Scott Jurek has gone on to become legendary. And I met them all in this super hub forming time. Seattle became a hub of ultra running, and it was only in retrospect. I don't know if anybody knew that was happening as this collection of people
were just continuing to push the limits of how far you could run.
Just drawn to the same stuff. Scott was leading trail runs. Groups of people would come and enjoy the experience, and it just became this kind of pulse, and people came to, and then branched out and created more hubs around the country. And I was 21 and a part of it.
Yeah.
And also didn't really look like anybody else. Female, 21, everybody was at least 10 plus years older than me, and also male.
Yeah.
And that was it for representation in ultra running at that time. So to answer your question, that's how I got started, was running amongst a bunch of men in Seattle in the early 2000s.
Yeah. And you started with 800 meters. And for those that are listening to this that don't know the distance, 800 meters is a brutal distance. It's a tough distance. I can do 400. 800 always just gassed me.
There's a little bit of a mental game there.
Right. It's almost like a marathon and a sprint in a sense, right? You're running a little bit longer distance, and we're talking about 2 laps, right?
2 laps, half mile.
Yeah. Versus laying it all out on the track on 1 lap, right? On the 400.
Yeah.
So
strategy.
How did you make that leap to, I mean, when did you run your first marathon? Because
I never did.
You never ran a marathon. You
Well,
just
I
went
should
from
say
800.
never. Yeah, I went from 800 to, no, I went from half marathon. So I did
Yeah.
some road races
Yeah.
the summer between freshman and sophomore year of college. My mom was my sponsor. She made sure I like paid for all my entry fees that year. And then, then I jumped to 50K. So I went from half marathon to 50K. So I ran my first 50-kilometer race at the Chuckanut 50K my senior year of college, which was in 2000.
That's a long distance.
And
that's not flat.
No, there's 5,000 feet of gain in the middle 18 miles.
Okay, so tell me, just let's kind of fill in that gap of you were running track, which is a very different. It seems like it's the same motion, but it's pretty different, isn't it? Than running like really, really long distances.
I think the main, like the sticking point for me was coming back from overseas and having had some of these kind of long run exploratory feeling running experiences, and just kind of being enthralled with like, my body can do this. It can go to these places and my legs powered it. And then falling in with a community that's what it's all about. And then I remember my first trail run, because I would run with them on the call them the urban Thursday night speed runs and stuff. And so they finally got me to run trails with them. They'd always go at 6:00 on Sunday mornings. And as a college kid, that was my only morning to sleep in, because I worked at the coffee shop on Saturdays, the running store at 11 a.m. on Sundays. And so like to get up early, but I finally joined them. And I remember chasing Scott around. I didn't want to get dropped. We were in the woods at Cougar Mountain, and that just scared me. But then I like was slipping and falling and muddy, and he looked back and I was laughing.
Yeah.
Like you would think maybe somebody might be really frustrated or whatever, but I just wanted to like figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think that was a moment of like, oh, this is why all that other running now makes sense, because this is where my body wants to be. And then it continued with the community too. The people that are drawn to trail running, like we all have our peeps, right? Like the way we're like drawn into a certain community, and within the community, like smaller bits of that. And I feel like trail running people are the people that like the energy goes full circle. I put a lot of energy into being a runner. Trail running brought that energy back. And so that circle's more like continuous, right? Rather than just kind of feeling exhausting. If the energy's coming back, then you can keep it going.
Yeah, the laughing and the like muddy and tripping and but still going is a really
good curiosity. I think it's a big one. Like, can I do this? Like they said that when I think when I was introduced to Scott Jurek, he had just won the Western States 100. And rather than a lot of the questions that are usually asked of an ultramarathon are like, well, how do you go to the bathroom, or what do you eat, or do you sleep? I was like, what's that like? Like I was just like instantly curious, and like, it might take a bit, but we got her. Like she's one that'll.
She's one of us.
She's one that's
a part of it. Yeah. So
totally.
So for people that don't know, most people know that a marathon is 26.2. Got that right. Good job, Leo.
Nice job.
But an ultramarathon, what constitutes an ultramarathon?
Anything longer than a marathon.
There we go.
So some people will be like, yeah, if you're just a little bit over that, or typical race distances have tended to be 50K, 50 mile, 100K, 100 miles. So 31.1 miles is 50K, 50 miles. 100K is 62 miles, 100 miles, 165 kilometers, 100 miles. Now there's this whole thing of 200 milers as well. And I have not done one of those. I set the FKT on the Tahoe Rim Trail in 2015. That was 175 miles. But now there's a whole racing series of 200-mile races. And I had my first experience with that, pacing and crewing a dear friend of mine just this last summer. And it's a whole nother ball game. I have coaching clients that I coach training for 200 milers, and their plans are not completely, but there's some significant differences to train for that versus 100 miles or less, which that sounds ridiculous as I say it.
It's but, a long
yeah.
And you know, you've got someone like a David Goggins that's like still able to, you know, yell like affirmations and like get after it and get, you know, whatever. That's not what he says. He says other stuff.
Yes.
But like it's a different breed of human that is able to just run that amount of distance, but also a lot of it comes down to coaching and training, right? I mean, would you argue as a coach that most people, if they set their mind to it and do the proper training and proper eating and proper all of the things, that you can accomplish a lot of these different running distances?
I would just throw on to all of that if you want to.
If you want to, you got to really want it.
Because the want becomes bigger and bigger, or needs to be bigger and bigger the further the distance. Yeah. Like, and I call it your why. Like, why are you out here? Because it's going to get hard, and there's going to be parts you really maybe don't think you want to go, but if you can come back to your why and it's a strong why, that'll get you through.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the business side of it. You got into it, and running it's a growing community, and it's like a niche of the running world, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's this long distance running. Did you immediately say, all right, this is going to be how I build a business. I'm going to build a business around this. How did you monetize it? Because that's an important part of, you got to pay for your expenses. You have to pay for travel. You have to pay for, like, how did you do that?
Oh man. Well, I worked in the outdoor industry for, pretty much since I left the running store. So graduated college, stayed for 1 year with the running store, and then was hired by a footwear company in Seattle called Montreal, who has since been sold to Columbia. And more, I think the brand is totally disappearing. But at the time, it was the only trail running brand. Like, it was the one in the sense of, it was the brand that was giving money to the sport. My job was the athlete coordinator and event coordinator. So I sponsored 100 athletes and about the same amount of events, which created an awesome race calendar. And I got to go promote shoes at different events and, bring together our team. And sponsorship was like this running kit that I created and had screen printed and sent around, and co-branding with other companies like Patagonia, and sending some people some shoes, and then meeting up at these events. And so anyways, I loved that, like, introduction to the ultra running world, and being a part of like this brand that was so dedicated to it. Now there's like so many brands are connected to the trail running world. And I feel really thankful for the timing that I came up. It's a different deal to be a professional athlete in the ultra running world now than it was back then. Like I said, there was shoes and clothes, like
just better quality. It's just been innovation.
People can make a living as a runner now, like as an ultra runner. They can have a sponsorship that is a financial contribution that they can live off of. That was not a thing. Scott Jurek won 7 Western states on his own credit card. So totally different, in 2 decades of evolution of the sport.
You've been around for all of it.
And there was more before me too. I can definitely see where this has all come up. After Montreux was sold, I moved on to a couple other brands, and then I got to work for a nonprofit named the Conservation Alliance, and stayed with them for about 3 years. And it was awesome work, like working in the nonprofit world, but still within the outdoor industry. Our mission continues to be, I'm a member company of it now, but protecting wild places that we love to play is the basis of it. And so you have an industry based on the outdoors. Well, what if the outdoors go to construction and building and dams, and how do you justify making a sleeping bag that there's no wilderness for it to be used in, kind of thing? So companies contributing to the nonprofits and land protection groups that are working to protect those places. So awesome work, right in line with how I value everything, but it wasn't my work. Like, I was there, and I brought up a database system, and, we changed. I think we evolved from 60 member companies to about 100 in the time that I was there. We brought on more member companies, and they've continued to grow, which is awesome. But it wasn't my work. And I had a couple of sponsorships that I pieced together that could cover baseline living.
What's that process like, getting a sponsorship? What's the process of it? Do you get approached? Do you approach people? What is that like?
All of the above. I think having I can only see it in hindsight. Like you said, did you go into it making a business this way? It was all just picking my way along the path as it felt good. And that decision to leave the Conservation Alliance, it's one of the biggest forks in the road that I can imagine, and can still picture at that time, visualizing this kind of cruisy country road, maybe gravel, and it just cruised off into the sunset. I could see living in Bend, that's where it was based, and then just here it goes kind of thing. Where this other one, it was a hard right, stoop, super steep, rocky, rooty. Who knew where the path went?
This is a theme with you. I think.
That was the one I chose.
So as you kind of grew in this industry, this industry was even though you said that there was a lot of buildup even before you had gotten into it, there's a lot of evolution that happened after, a lot of big evolution, right? Continuing evolution. So for people that are listening to this that don't know what it's like to be a sponsored athlete, you said it wasn't until recently that people can make a genuine living being a long distance runner. What is that? What are like you said, did you get approached with you specifically? Did you find a brand that you really liked and then just were like, hey, I want to be a part of this, and then just go out and show that you can run and break records and set records and whatnot? Or like, how did that happen? What was your first sponsorship? How did that evolve?
I think like working in the Montreal line and showing up at these races as the Montreal girl showing off shoes, and then like just throw all the shoes in the bag and go run with everybody at these events, and then come back the female winner, sometimes placing in the top
probably helps
4, 5, 10 men. They're like, wait, that's not just the Montreal girl. Who is this? So that was like a wonderful start to it all. Like I was traveling for work and got to like, my work was going to the mountains, like all over the world. By the time by 2006, I had a couple of passport stamps added just because I was running. So that was a wonderful start. And networking, like just being who I was, loving, extrovert, community, like connector, like, oh, you should know this person kind of person. I got to know a lot of people within the industry. And then, gosh, I guess it was 2008. I'd left them. No. 2008 was when Patagonia approached me and said, hey, you've been around for 8 years now in some capacity or another.
You look cold. Yeah, we have a jacket.
We need a female trail running ambassador. There was no representation for Patagonia. There was. They had a European female athlete, but they wanted a US global athlete. And I was just like, best call of my life. Like, really? Me? Like, I'm the one? So that started off, and that was while I was at the Conservation Alliance. And then in 2010 was with the combination of that and a retail store. And I think like one other, I don't know if I had a footwear brand at that time because Montreal was gone. Maybe Vask had come on at that time. I'd have to go back and actually look at like emails and stuff. But yeah, so that was enough to like push me out the door. And I even remember the last day of the Conservation Alliance almost calling my boss back and being like, I'm just kidding. Can I come back? But we had already hired and trained. Yeah. But I was like, no, do not pick up the phone. You've got this. And then it just has been an evolution since there. One of my favorite moments of that was somebody emailed me within that first week when I was in just that, oh my gosh, what did I just do phase? And he's like, I think you should coach me. Wasn't even on my radar, person I'd never met before. And so his name was Guy, and I emailed him back and I said, you know what? I'm not really considering this. And then 6 months later, I said, what do you think? What made you reach out to me? And he was willing to be my guinea pig. And we worked together for a couple of years. But that first year, he was my only client. And so it was just like adding in all these other pieces to this running life, and then just kind of following the ones that keep bringing joy. Coaching is how I was able to buy a house this year or a year ago. Just finally. So that running, like you said, it like shoes and clothes are not going to feed me, the dog, and put fuel in the car to be able to move around to these things. So how do you piece it all together? And I knew early on that I didn't want to be a sponsored athlete forever. And I'm still like baffled and loving that I remain relevant in this different capacity. I'm not necessarily in the competitive realm anymore by choice. Like I just don't have it in the same way I used to. And when it meant to like training the long distances, showing up ready to race. Like
your why's probably changed. There's like the direction of your why, same core, but also with the coaching part being, and then the book that you wrote, and we'll get into
the race directing
and the race directing,
and then
all
just
that.
Life. I'm 45 years old now. There's a lot of other pieces to life that weren't a part of my 20s and 30s. So it's kind of beautiful. And then also like reflective. I feel like I'm definitely in that midlife, like reflecting on
introspective.
And like what am I morphing to, including what I've like how I identify and have been, and then how does that carry forward into what's this like next realm? I don't have the answer yet. It's kind of I don't
think you're afraid of what the answer could be. I think it sounds like you're pretty open to it. Let's talk about fear and courage in this whole conversation around like there is a difference, or being courageous and then being in a state of like fear driven, right? And it sounds like there's that. I want to go back to the fork in the road where you're like, well, I could ride off into the sunset on this nice little gravel road, or I could take a U-turn and go up the hill and get muddy and laugh, and who knows what's gonna happen. I might fall down a couple times or 100 times. Tell me a little bit more about how you process challenges and fear, because that moment, like a lot of people would probably go, man, this is secure. But you leapt into it. It sounds like. Tell me about that decision-making process. What's going on in your brain when you see a challenge or fear?
I don't know if this is directly going to answer your question, but I just heard this on one of the many podcasts that I listened to. The concept of, I hope I do this justice, but extraordinary versus ordinary, and mostly not in perception of what that is in life, but where are we most comfortable? I feel like when the person spoke about this, I was like, oh my gosh, that finally makes sense to me. How I am comfortable, call it in the extraordinary or chaos or like lot energetic, like the spinning plates or whatever, where someone that can see the cruisy road and that feels comfortable, that looks like way challenging to me. Like, yeah, what do I do with all that?
Yeah.
Over here, there's like things I get to figure out and work on. And so I think that it's kind of in realm with what you're talking about. It's not necessarily fear driven or courageous feeling. It's just where I thrive, feel most alive, I'm comfortable is when things are kind of not easy or laid out or as much as a planner as I am, it's because I like figuring out the puzzles that go along with the plan.
Yeah. Complacency is more, it scares you more than the just being in the moment and problem solving and just moving forward and betting on yourself.
Right. Well, but there's also like the piece to I don't know that I would call it complacency. There's a beauty in like seeing the path and knowing it and like a simplicity that I crave. Like I wish there was a part of me that could just chill sometimes and just like enjoy the open road. And I think I can, and that's shifting more and more as I like see both sides and understand. But like in terms of making those decisions through my 20s and 30s and what I was drawn to and even now in my 40s, like that makes more sense to me. And I've been called crazy and how do you do this? Like my example is like, I'll be packed for 3 trips and I will come home, put the toiletries from one bag into the next, maybe get that one sorted, but take off and leave again. And I could do that for like days, weeks, months at a time. And that, and then luggage gets lost and a flight gets canceled and I'm like rolling with it.
Yeah.
But the drive to the same office every day and create like a meal plan, like I don't know what to do with like, and but I don't think that that's a bad thing. Like, no. I don't think that's complacency or boredom or even ordinary. Yeah. It's like, so where are you comfortable in?
Yeah.
And so if that can help drive like why you may make the decision around taking the leap and the U-turn versus like the steady stability of because there's beauty and extraordinary in ordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like there's been a lot of evolution for you because you've stayed in that state of you're organized. You're clearly very organized, but because you have to be, and we'll get into
in order to get it all done. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's 10 different Krissys running around that are a part of the same brain, but also doing all these different things with the help of amazing teams that you work with, and we'll get into that as well.
Totally.
I want to ask one more question about sponsorship. So when you first got the first sponsorship, and they said, "Here's how much we're going to pay you to do X, Y, and Z," did you look at it and go, "I'm set. I don't know. I can live on this." Or did you go, "Nope, got to keep going.
I got to piece all these things together and keep going." And it's a year contract. That doesn't guarantee anything.
So there's a timeline. There's an amount of money that they're willing to give you to be an ambassador, wear their shoe,
and requirements for what you have to do to earn that money.
Yeah. And is it restrictive? Are there some that are pretty open ended? Give me a little bit of a spectrum on what those contracts look like.
I think it's really different for each individual. In my case, I tend to be drawn to and draw in. It's like a really collaborative experience. Like, and thankfully nothing's ever been based on my resume, like my running resume, like how many wins I've had, what podium places I get. The financial hasn't been tied to that. You asked a question earlier that, this answer popped in my mind and I didn't speak it out loud. I'm not remembering the question, but the answer is when I left the Conservation Alliance, my 2 objectives were I had to keep enjoying it and I couldn't do it on credit. And my main reason, like when you turn your passion into how you make a financial living and you supporting yourself, that's scary.
Yeah.
Because if that thing, if it doesn't like fund what you're trying to do, now it has a negative connotation and it's the thing that you love. It's the thing that like, any given day, if I can get in a run and that's all I do and the rest of the day feels like it went to whatever, at least I got that run in. Yeah. But if all of a sudden that run it's not that run, but like if running's not footing the bill and I've got all this pressure on running. So those are my 2 rules. And I think that's been what's made it possible. I had like a little nest egg, and that little nest egg is still sitting there. Like it didn't go into the house. It hasn't bought me a vehicle or anything. Like that is
Do you
just
even
like,
do you have a car, or do you just run
I do
everywhere?
have a
Okay,
car,
just
yeah.
I wanted to just
I
like
actually,
just everyone's wondering it. Yeah.
yeah, no, I actually own 2 vehicles. I lived in one of my vehicles for a long time, or for 2 years. When I was trying to buy a house, I lived in the van, but with my little dog.
So you pieced it together. You figured out a way to not build debt, which is great. That's an important stipulation to have. You had one coaching client at this time. You got your sponsorship. The sponsorships kind of the collaborative, the good sponsorships started to kind of layer onto each other. Different, what are some different examples of, like, I'm assuming shoes and like, do you have like a backpack with water, like for the long distance
hydration companies?
Hydration companies.
Yeah.
So you had all these different layers that kind of came into this. Okay, I'm pretty set. I can go out and go on a run, and I have enough income to pay for my living expenses. At that point, would you be able to cover
and still be able to travel for events and have those costs covered? And it was.
And you're still winning. You're winning these races.
Yeah.
All this, there's this other side to it where you're not just, showing other people the quality of those brands. You genuinely like them. You're collaborating.
That was key. Yeah.
But then you're also winning these races. You're just casually winning races while you're like trying to like. There's all these other plates in the air. Tell me about the first one that you ran. What was that like for you? The first ultra marathon that you ran and won, and people go, "Whoa!"
Well, the Chuckanut 50K was my first ultra, and I did win and set a course record that year in 2000, my senior year of college, and then took off and went on spring break to the Bahamas. Nice. Kind of funny to think back to that point in life. And that was prior to working for Montreal. I was still working at the running store at that time. And then I feel like some of those early races with Montreal, like I got to travel to bigger and bigger events, and it wasn't like I was just winning the little ones. Like I would be placing or winning some of the bigger events, the Mount Masochist 50 miler in Virginia. I remember that I went in and they called me a sandbagger afterwards. Like, "Oh, you didn't even tell us you were this good," kind of thing. I was like, I didn't know.
I don't have to tell you that.
I haven't run this distance before. I have no idea who else I'm running against and where I should be in the field. Luckily I'm not one of those people that gets caught up in like stats and who's who and
how can you be a sandbagger for running? I feel like that's something you only say about golfers or something.
No, I don't know. That was just like the way that one evolved. So it would probably be somewhere in there. And then in 2005, I ran what's called the Grand Slam of ultra running. It's the 4 oldest 100 milers. So Western States was the end of June. 2 or 3 weeks later was the Vermont 100. 4 or 5 weeks later was Leadville. And then 2 or 3 weeks later was Wasatch. So it's like 400 milers within 11 weeks. And then, oh, by the way, I added a 100 miler in April in South Africa.
500 miles, lots of traveling. And it's not like you just ran 500 miles. You also were running miles in between the 500 miles. How many miles just for
I have no idea.
1,000 miles?
No idea. Or just somebody running. What's the question?
Like if you had those 5 races and you're also training in between, is it like safe to say that you may have run 1,000 miles in that time frame?
Maybe in 11 weeks. Yeah. Cause the time in between. Yeah.
11 weeks.
6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. 50 miles a week in between. Yeah. Maybe not as much.
So how do you train for that? And just for the record, don't buy my book on how to train for a marathon, which is run 10 miles on day one. But how do you train and prepare? Just a little, snapshot of like, how do you get ready for one of those races?
Well, it comes from a lot of like build up, right? Yeah. So it's not just right out the gate. This is what you
stretch.
Do. Yeah. Just body maintenance. Like how do you take care of yourself? How do you fuel yourself? These are big things I would talk about with a client. In terms of writing training plans, a lot of times what I like to do is build people up anywhere. Like the baseline and what's in the book is 3 weeks and then 1 week recovery. So say we start at 20 miles a week and then we go to 28 miles and then we go to 32 or 34 miles and then we go to 15. And so then the next time we'd start 28, 34. And within there's long runs, there's maybe some kind of speed work, there's a pace setting kind of work, and then easy runs too. Also very key strength work. So running is very like for the trail running is a little better. I don't know if better is the right word, but more dynamic than road running. Road running can be very like just form driven, where trail running, you're bouncing over, climbing over, under.
Yeah. It involves a lot more, probably like
muscle recruitment.
stabilizers. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, and alongside that, doing strength work is really supportive to running. And I think it's all part of your training. It's not like you just go do that, or that's cross training. That's a part of being a healthy, solid runner.
Yeah.
So that would be like a baseline of how I would start a program for someone. And then writing the book was the hardest thing, though, because how do I like make a concrete plan that everybody's supposed to follow? Because
everyone's different.
Everybody's different. And so that's when somebody calls me, I'll ask like, why are you hiring a coach? I have a book. And they're like, accountability is like the number one answer I get. Like 98% of the time, that's at least one of them. But then the personalization. So like taking what's going on for that person in their life, and then creating a training plan that goes with that. And that's constantly evolving. I write 1, maybe 2 weeks in advance for people to be able to plan, because I'm not going to put those 3 weeks of mileages out there. And let's say they only do 10 the first week. We're not jumping to 28 the next week.
You have to adjust. So let's go back to, you had one guy who had reached out to you and said, it was a guy.
His name was Guy.
Mr. Guy.
His name is Guy. He's still
no, I know. I'm just kidding. But he reached out to you and said, hey, I want to coach with you. Were you thinking about coaching at that point, or did you just, you said,
wasn't even on my radar?
You're coaching yourself
as a way.
Right?
I had not had a coach. There wasn't ultra running coaches weren't necessarily a thing. That's only come up in the last bit, that, somebody like has a plan, seems to do well, runs some races, has an affinity for coaching, and they become a coach. I don't have any like initials after my name. Like I've got 20 plus years of hard knocks of my own running experiences and 13 years of coaching people. And that's
all you need. Yeah. So you had one guy that you were coaching, and tell me about, how did it grow from there? How did your coaching business
Good question.
grow from there?
How did I go up from there? I don't know how I actually, like those first, like going from 1 to, I really don't remember, because I've never placed ads. I have just in recent years put a page on my own website that I coach, like in the last 10 years. Well, I guess I've been coaching for 13, but somewhere in there. It's been word of mouth, I think, for the most part, in terms of that kind of growth. And then, gosh, through the pandemic with podcasts, it was awesome, because it was like I was interviewed. People would listen and then decide if they liked how I answered questions without ever having talked to me. So clients would just come ready to hire me because they knew my philosophy, how I approach people, what's important to me as a coach, and if it resonated or didn't, because there was other coaches on these podcasts too. And it helped people filter coaches at that point.
Who they align with. Yeah. And that's just a quick segue. It's a really powerful tool. And I know we talked a little bit about business versus brand, and you like to look at it as a business, but you represent yourself. You are your own brand. I know you don't want me to use the word brand, but really, like when we talked back during the pandemic, and as I kind of followed, your trail running, and it's like really fascinating to watch you portray who you are on social media, which is just who you are, which is cool, because it can be used in many different ways. But you've built a big following in that community around your coaching, your book, and also doing the Chuckanut 50K. But then also a lot of people are interested in what you're doing. Like there's a lot of people out there that are following what you're posting on Instagram, or interested in the content you're putting out there. And it's really genuine. Tell me a little bit more about your relationship with social media. You're doing it well, but
I don't know that I would say I'm doing it well. I think there's so many tools available that maybe I don't want to blame it on age, but I'm resistant to, for some reason. So in terms of what's on there, it's like when I feel excited, like is what I'm sharing. Like I don't go into my opinions on things. And I feel like even saying that, I'm like, well, I'm pretty general, and I like to talk to like all the sides. I don't want to be divisive in any way. I want to feel like inclusive, and I want to hear your side and share and have those conversations. So I don't utilize social media in a way that, I don't know, even brings in business. Like maybe on the Chuckanut one, but that's somebody that's coming to it directly because they're running the race. But I don't think I have a great answer about social media. It's not my strong suit. I think personal relationships are way more important to me, and I'll put time into that. And um, taking care of like having enough, like being grounded and solid in myself, that when I am interacting with people, like it comes from that very genuine, not dropping plates place.
Yes. And I think that answers that question, because that's genuinely, I went through, not to get on a tangent, but I went through Instagram and completely unfollowed everyone I didn't know, or local, they weren't local businesses. Of course, they suggest more content. They just throw crap at you anyways. But the people that I don't know personally, or know a little bit personally, that I gravitate in that, forum towards people that are just being themselves, and you can tell that they're just being themselves. And that's why it's this tool where you can tell who's being themselves and who's not being themselves, and who's comfortable with who they are, and who's just doing their thing and loves or gets excited. Like you said, you interact with it when you're excited about it, and then don't when you're not. So anyways, that was just the segue to, social media. But you have built this, there are all these different kind of individual businesses, but they all are a web that are one piece here.
All based on running.
So tell me about, let's kind of, you word of mouth built the coaching clientele, continuing just to interact with people at events and all these things. And then you wrote a book, and you've had 2 editions. That's a good sign.
Yeah.
Tell me about writing the book. What was that process?
Hardest thing I've ever done. Extrovert.
Harder than running 100 miles?
Sitting there by myself, like, because I'm not a writer that can go to a coffee shop and have a lot of people around. I mean, even to call myself a writer, that was like a big leap when I wrote the first edition. But the focus I needed to be able to do it is so counter to my personality that it was really challenging. It was very focused. Both editions were written in about 2 months.
That's fast.
It is pretty fast.
You don't do anything slow, I think, or not well, bad English, but you do it seems like you do everything with a purpose. And even if you don't want to do it, but it's part of your journey, you just get it done. 2 months is, I know people that have been writing a book for 30 years or 20 years, and so that's really impressive. But
I had a timeline. Give me a deadline. Chuckanut's in 8 or 10 days. I'm going to have that thing ready. I do better with deadlines. I think I do have another book that I would love to get out there at some point that has sat there for about 10 years.
Yeah.
And there's 18 or so chapters written, and there's no deadline on it. So it's still sitting there.
So how did you, tell me about the process of getting your book out there. Once you said, okay, I'm going to do this, I have this amount of time to get it done. Here's the general content. You planned it all out. You worked with a publisher, right? Well,
and I would give the publisher a ton of credit because the publisher came to me to write the book.
Yeah.
I didn't have the outline until they had started the whole conversation. It wasn't like I had this plan and I wanted to get published. Yeah. That's a very different writing experience. Most people have the book idea, have to create the marketing plan. Yeah. Like it's a whole thing, which I've tried to do with the other possibility or other manuscript or whatever that I have sitting there. But the fact that it came from the publisher to me, I just put the wheels in motion, and I definitely work better in that realm.
So they approached you, said, I think you have a lot to share about this topic, which I think for everyone that's listened this far in the podcast, I think we all agree that you have a lot to share on this topic and a lot of really amazing expertise on this. They approached you. You had a deadline to write it. Tell me about working with a publisher. They helped you structure it. What had you ever worked with a publisher before? Did you know?
The funny thing was they actually had a blog was all I had at that point. I didn't even have a website. I just had this blog, and they liked the way I wrote. That's why they came to me. And the publisher, Page Street Publishing, is a branch of Macmillan, which is a much bigger publishing house. And Page Street focuses on how-to books. And so they're like, what would you want to write about? And I wrote and said, I love first-time runners. Like Chuckanut 50K is this like grand stage for people to try out ultra running. And I love piecing all those things together and seeing those people go from like, do you think I can do it? To like, oh my gosh, I freaking did this thing. Yeah. That's my jam. Like I still tout myself as like the beginner ultra running coach. I'm not the coach to take 5 minutes off your 50-mile time.
Damn it. I was going to ask you about that after this. I'm really trying to get
that time down. My pace down. Yeah, I'm not that. I'm just more about like creating the relationship with the sport and the sustainability. Like I'm going to help clients make a a choice or decision that's going to keep them running longer, which might include not running the race that they hired me to coach them for. Because if it means they're going to run the race and then be done with the sport, I'm not your coach.
Yeah.
So, but where were we going with this?
No, I answered it. You hit it. No, I was just
the publisher.
Yeah.
So they came to me and asked about what would I write, and I put this whole proposal back to them, and they said, "Oh, we already have somebody writing that book. What else would you want to write?" And I was like, "What? Who else is going to write this book?" And so somehow, I got the audacity to write back and say, "No, you know what? I really think this is the book I need to write." And I could write one about fast packing. I've dabbled there. I know a little bit about, maybe educating someone on that, but I think this is my book and this is why. And I listed out all the reasons. And then like 3 weeks later, I got an email. I was recovering from some crazy FKT that I had done, sitting on the couch, and this email popped in and it said, "Sometimes the stars align." And I opened it up and it said, "The other author pulled out. We'd like you to write this book." So it wasn't like a gimme, like right
You didn't try to you didn't say I'll race them for the
no. No. Yeah. So that's how that piece worked out. And then just creating a contract. Authors typically get an advance. It was beans for what we were doing. And then royalties follow after that in terms of like the logistics of how a contract works. Then they have an editor that makes sure you dot all your I's and cross your T's and all that.
Yeah, I wouldn't cross any T's or dot any I's. I have poor punctuation. Decent writer, poor punctuation. That's my new motto. But let's flip back to the business side of it, because there is a cost that you charge for coaching, and you get paid for being sponsored and for for every book that sells. Tell me about, how did you decide in a business where there's not really many other people doing what you're doing outside of the sponsorship? There's kind of a spectrum of how that all operates, but books, how much you charge for a book and how much you charge for coaching. These are kind of these frontiers where you go, well, this is what I think my time's worth, and this is my overhead, and this is how did you, what were the nuts and bolts? How did you decide what to charge? How do you decide what your time is worth?
Oh, that was a really hard lesson. And it started back even working in the outdoor industry. And there's, and even early having, I've caught myself multiple times. This is a freaking real job, what I'm doing now. But I left the 8 to 5 office job where people say, "Oh, do you want to come, run our race and speak at the pre-race event and do this kind of stuff?" And maybe they would comp my entry fee or something. And I got to this point of I'm paying to do other people's marketing.
Yeah.
I loved the experiences. I loved getting to go and be in the community and run. And I easily wrote it off as I get to go and do these experiences. But I don't know, however many of those, it started to be wait a second, this is what I've got. This is my accounting degree. This is my, I'm not making money on the side, or in a office job. This is my craft. This is what I've mastered, if you will, for 20 years. And I had to put a value to it, because if I don't, nobody else is going to. And I like to do the word of the year. Instead of a resolution, I'll choose word of the year. And one year I chose local.
Yeah.
And my word encompassed 360 miles from Bellingham. And I couldn't leave 360 miles of Bellingham unless I was being paid. I ended up traveling more and making the most money I had up to that point that year, because every time I had to leave that bubble, I had to charge, which I hadn't done for years and years.
Was that uncomfortable?
No, it was so rewarding.
Yeah.
So I ended up changing my word about halfway through to value, because I taught myself my own value, and had great conversations with other entrepreneurial type people that said, there's events that you don't want to do, you charge more because there's a price. I was like, well, I never would have thought of some of this stuff, because
it's called the contractor method, where if they don't want to do a job, they're like, flooring, I hate flooring, $50,000. You're more. That's crazy. You need it, right?
Yeah.
Great. Here you go.
Yeah. And I just all these, because I think I had a hard time applying maybe some of that knowledge, because I loved it so much. How do I get to be the one that makes money, let alone a living, doing this thing that I love so much? And that year really was important in terms of teaching that value, because why not? If I can, why not? And it's not I'm providing a service, I should be paid for
the
it.
answer
But
to you doing it for free is always going to be yes, right? And so
she'll give it to us?
Yeah.
Great.
But at the same time, when you were building that and you were getting ready for that mantra, your word of the year, do you feel like a lot of that time was really powerful for like building like the connections and
100%.
like that led
Even
up to
my
that?
own love of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've listened to Elizabeth Gilbert, her book, Big Magic.
I have not. Yeah.
There's a great, I wish I could quote better, but it's of the same topic and what I talked about, like I couldn't have my passion be the way I make money, or if it is, I have to still enjoy it and I couldn't go into debt doing it. She goes into this like deeper speaking to it of how important just letting your passion be that and then make money other ways until you really can. Like I don't think she didn't start making a living off of her writing until she'd published like 11 books or something.
Yeah.
So just really creating that space for her craft just to be that and not anything else. And maybe tying in what you were just saying of that's kind of what that time was, is I just got to love it. It's a good thing.
How do you take advice from, who do you take advice from? Tell me a little bit more about that. Cause I'm sure there's a lot of people in your journey that have said, hey, you should definitely go do this. Or you shouldn't do that. And you seem to have a really, powerful internal compass. Tell me a little bit more, like, who do you listen to? Who do you not, like, how do you filter advice?
Oh, good question. I don't know that I appreciate you saying that I have a good internal compass, because it has been the thing that has guided through all these decisions. Right. And I would also consider, especially the early part of my running and just even how I interact with the world, is I'm a sponge. Yeah. Like I'm going to soak it in and then filter. Like I don't have that. I'm not one to like stop it. If I'm hearing something and it's not resonating, I don't have that. Like I will hear it and talk about it and ask more questions and then like make a decision on how or why or what it works for me. And that like super basic and ultra running, like what foods should I try? Somebody could throw 5 different things at me and I'll try them all.
There's a new superfood.
Yeah. I'm not going to look at it and go, no, I'm going to try it. So I guess I've gathered a lot of information that way, for better or worse. Like I probably could have saved myself some time if that filter was a little like tighter weave or whatever. But yeah.
So in that same vein, you seem very willing to try and figure things out. But at what point have you set up a mechanism where you go, okay, I've been trying this too long and this doesn't work. I need to go a different direction, or I need to just completely change this particular thing. How do you, because there is a point when that you go too far down a road and you're like, okay, there's perseverance, there's tenacity. I've really pushed hard, and some things work and some things don't. What is that shelf life? How do you determine shelf life for ideas as a business owner?
I don't feel like mine have any, like they're not like hard stops or pivots or anything. Mine are more like a cruising, like I'll like steering a big ship kind of thing, as opposed to like being able to pivot on a jet ski or something. Like I'll follow things a little longer and start changing them slowly. It might not look that way on the outside. I've been told that, like, whoa, you just went and bought a house? No, I lived in my van for 2 years looking around Bellingham trying to find a home. Like it might look like it's a quick pivot, but my brain's working on things for a long time leading up
and
to.
You naturally, magnetize towards certain things, and you naturally go, this is not working out great. This is still happening and working, but it's not working out great. Okay, so this is a big question for me around your business, and there are other facets now between coaching and directing the 50K and not doing as many of your own races. You're still involved in races, but you're not doing it as often, it sounds like, as you used to. And a big part of being an athlete is your body is part of your business, right? Like how you treat your body, how it, if it's healthy, if it's not. Tell me about injuries. Tell me about, at some point you're not going to be able to run as fast or as far. And this is just, but you're going to do it a lot longer than most people because you're superhuman. So tell me about that. Yeah.
I think the funny thing about the whole sport is that really, to me, it requires a lot of patience. And I'm like, as we've probably noted throughout many answers here, I'm not a very patient person.
That wasn't the other
So
book you were going to write, was about patience.
Patience. Yeah. So the fact that I've had that patience through this sport, and it's like, that's been the like kind of interesting, maybe it like counterbalances the rest of my life, or there's something there when it comes to that. But that's been the gift in terms of like, I don't make decisions. I don't even, I can't think of a race that I ran and I'm like, I don't care what this does to me, or a training run. Like if something's like starting to hurt in a way that is an injury, I back off. I'm not going to push through stuff that's like wrong for my body. I might push through stuff that's wrong in the rest of the world, but not for my physical body. And that's been a huge gift. And so in terms of fueling, learning how to like maintain a healthy weight for myself and not get caught up in the, oh, runners are supposed to look a certain way or anything like that. Just like really resisting anything that's trying to tell me what to do. And especially if it's, how is it like, if it has the potential of breaking this like if I can't run, then that's not okay. I want to be able to run. So maybe to even like to the racing point, like it's getting harder and harder to recover from these races. Well, recovery means a lot of days without running. And I didn't want to live in that space. I want to be able to pick up and go for a 3 to 6 mile run with my dog and not be like nursing whatever happened in the last 100-mile race. The cost reward wasn't there anymore. Like having to take months off or weeks off
just keeping your relationship with running
is really important to me. And that, I think that's evolved over the decades, but it's also what's carried me through and made it really sustainable.
And for those of you that are listening, if you're just like walking down the sidewalk and you see it like right by you, that's probably Krissy and her dog.
Yeah.
What's your dog's name?
She's faster than me. PD, it stands for Piedradura, which is hard rock in Spanish.
Oh, right on. Well, and she's a good runner as well.
She is, but she's so reluctant. Like most dogs, and she's a herding dog. Most dogs like lead off the front. You put on the waist leash and they've got a harness on. No, mine's figured out how to have me pull her.
Yeah.
Like she just like cruises off. But she's running. She's not like resisting. She's running back there, but she's just taking the nice little toe. She's my dog. She's such a good girl.
You can take my dog for a run anytime. He'd love it. We have a 6-month-old baby, so he's not getting as much running as he normally gets. But so what's next for you? I mean, you talked about you don't really know, like everything seems to be going really well.
Yeah.
And you seem happy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what's next for your evolution? What are some things that you're excited about? I know the 50K is coming up next week.
Yeah.
And if you haven't trained yet and you're listening to this, you should probably just wait for next year, or follow the Leo plan and just start training now. No, just kidding. But tell me a little bit more about the 50K for those that don't know, including myself, that much about what happens outside of running. It's a really big event.
Yeah, it's so lovely that it's become such a community event. Like I didn't live here for the first 15 years of race directing. I was either in Seattle or Bend or Boulder, but I'd come back and put on the Chuckanut 50K every year, and then moved here in 2015 to Bellingham. And so I would come back and people would talk about the Chuckanut 50K or the 50K. It just had its own name. Or the Middle 18 is like this common training run.
Yeah.
And like they'd be telling me about the 50K. I'm like, yeah, I know. Like it's my baby. Like I've brought that thing up since 2003 was my first year as race director.
It's a big event.
And it's come from like around 100 people the year I took it over to selling out this year in a week. Sometimes it sells out in hours at 600 spots. And then we get another 100 off the wait list to run 31 miles in the Chuckanuts in March.
Yeah.
I mean, we know what March is here, but luckily people
right.
love it. It's a classic. It's one of the I think somebody confirmed at one point, it's the oldest ultra in Washington State. It was founded in 93 by Doug McKeever and Richard West. And I took it over in 2003. So for the immediate future, Chuckanut, that's where my brain is focused. And then actually, like I talked about kind of sitting in this, my word for this year is chrysalis. And what I love about it is just being right here, right now. Like I'm in the chrysalis. I don't know what the next growth is. I'm right here and I'm taking in information. How am I feeling about race directing right now? How am I feeling about coaching right now? Where I live? Like all of it's just information, and it doesn't have to have a decision. One of those information pieces is I've taken a recent course on becoming a death doula or end of life doula.
Wow.
Looks like a pretty hard pivot.
Yeah.
But like I took the course back in November. I'm soaking in the information. I'm reading all these articles about this profession that really is calling to me. So it might look like all of a sudden I shut down my coaching business and I become a death doula 2 or 3 years from now. But that started like last November.
What does that mean to be a death doula? Just for people listening, what is
birth
that?
doula is a more common profession or known name. Yep. So that's a transition in life, coming into the world, the baby coming into the world, the woman birthing the child, the family growing. That's a transition in life. Death is also a transition of life. And so having, call it a guide, a companion, somebody to accompany through that transition at the end of life. And it's so beautiful. And we get so, like as a culture in the United States specifically, we get really scared about the word death and what it might mean. The more I get into it, it's just as beautiful as birth. Like it is all transitioning through life. And so
part of the cycle.
Yeah. So I'm not shutting down my coaching business. I'm still race directing the Chuckanut. I'm just taking in information. And that is something that's really calling to me. So we'll see where that leads.
It's beautiful. That's awesome. And it sounds like it's a part of your natural journey, which is this, like we talked about, it's not this quick. It's just this like, okay, it's what the
I'm
things
feeling this over here. Let's dig in. I took a course. Like, what does that lead to? And then my next step would be volunteering with hospice and going through that actual end of life with a couple of people and seeing, do I have it? Is it really call to me in that realm too? So
what nugget would you leave for, the person that has that feeling that they're called to do their own thing, and they see the two paths, right? Or multiple paths,
usually,
more than two, but it's easy to say two paths, but I think what kind of advice or information or guidance as a coach would you give someone that says, I'm ready for the next thing in my life, I don't know what it is, or has the same tenacity that you do and just hasn't found that thing that they love to do? What kind of advice would you pass along to that person?
It's way less action than you would think. It's more about sitting with yourself and just really listening. Yeah. It's hard to do, but it's so helpful. And it's not just sitting there waiting for the thing to come to you. It's actually like creating that like kind of meditative, clear space and just feeling into what feels right. It's not the ideas. It's not the thoughts. It's not the pursuits. It's just like really feeling what feels right. It's different than
follow that.
Yeah. I have to remind myself to do that too.
Well, thank you for sharing yourself and your story. And
well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is I'm still processing all of the information, and I just appreciate you sitting down and being vulnerable and talking about your story and telling us who you are. And I've never met anyone that has you have just such a unique blend of and web of businesses and you're so uniquely you. And I just really appreciate that. And
well, thank you. That's quite a compliment.
And we haven't been canceled yet. Season 4, episode 7. Thank you, Krissy. And just appreciate you for coming in.
Thank you.
Boom.